Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, because we know people are joining from all over the world. My name is Pradeep Nayak, and I am at the University of Waterloo. I'm also a part of the Vulnerability to Viability Global Partnership for Building Strong Small-Scale Fisheries. I'll be the moderator for this webinar today. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to provide a brief three-part introduction, following which we will then invite our guest today to make the presentation. So first, a little bit of introduction to the B2B Global Partnership, which is a transdisciplinary research, knowledge, and action network with over 100 members from Africa, Asia, Canada, and internationally. The goal of the global partnership is to support small-scale fisheries in their transition from vulnerability to viability. And the way we understand and work on vulnerability and viability is not just in an economic sense, but to also focus on the political, the social, the cultural, the ecological, environmental, and all other aspects of a small-scale fisheries life and livelihoods. At the same time, when we talk about vulnerability to viability transitions, it is not just unidirectional. As societies and communities can move from vulnerability towards viability, given certain drivers, they can also revert back from viability to vulnerability. So we study the multidirectionalities and the multidimensionalities of small-scale fisheries in the pursuit of vulnerability to viability transitions. Our focus is fourfold. One is to create the right kind of knowledge, rather co-create and co-produce the knowledge that can be helpful in working on this transition from vulnerability to viability. To create a repository of the knowledge that is co-produced so that it can be used across all levels of small-scale fisheries. Developing the right kind of transdisciplinary capacity across, again, all levels that can be effective in making the transition possible. And then the fourth objective of our partnership is to synthesize and integrate the knowledge for governance and policy approaches for building strong small-scale fisheries. The B2B Global Partnership aims to identify the diverse factors and conditions contributing to the vulnerability of small-scale fisheries and engage collaboratively with small-scale fisher communities and other key NGO, government, and university partners to enhance small-scale fisheries viability. We're conducting transdisciplinary community-engaged research in 6 countries in Asia. That includes Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, Thailand, and 6 countries in Africa. That includes Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tanzania. In doing so, the B2B Global Partnership brings people and organizations together across physical, cultural, and disciplinary boundaries through a shared interest in addressing global change processes and the impacts on small-scale fisheries. The B2B thematic webinar series, for which we all have gathered virtually here, is an initiative of the B2B Global Partnership to facilitate and generate high-level discussions on vulnerability and viability themes and topics within the context of small-scale fisheries. The goal is to feature academics, representatives of government and intergovernmental organizations, practitioners, and members of the civil society who have made significant contributions to the theoretical, the practical, and the policy aspects of small-scale fisheries, both locally and globally. The B2B thematic webinar series takes place on the last Friday of every month, and it will continue to be so during the whole year of 2023. The series is available internationally through live streaming on YouTube. Details regarding the monthly webinar, invited speakers, topics and titles, and the links to the webinar platform is available on our website, that is www.b2bglobalpartnership.org. Today's webinar is the 5th in the series of B2B thematic webinars planned for the year 2023, and the 29th since January 2021 when we actually started. And it is my privilege to introduce Nicole Franz, as our distinguished speaker today. Nicole Franz is an Equitable Livelihoods Team Leader at Food and Agriculture Organization's Fisheries Division. She is a development economist with 18 years of experience in intergovernmental organizations. Nicole holds a master's in international cooperation and project design from the University La Sapienza in Rome, and a master in economic and cultural cooperation and human rights in the Mediterranean region. As part of her role in FAO, Nicole has led and co-led numerous research and policy projects focusing on enhancing the profile of resource-dependent communities, especially the small-scale fisheries communities around the world. The Illuminating Hidden Harvest, on which her talk would be focusing mainly today, is one of the many examples of such projects. Nicole's role has been instrumental in the formulation and the implementation of the Small-Scale Fisheries Guideline, and you will see glimpses of that in Nicole's talk today. Since 2011, she has been working for the FAO Fisheries Division, where she coordinates the implementation of the Voluntary Guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication, which is known as the Small-Scale Fisheries Guideline, with a focus on inclusive policy processes and stakeholder empowerment. Nicole has published extensively on topics focusing on all aspects pertaining to the building of strong and viable small-scale fisheries. This constitutes her numerous referred papers, books as editors, and author of chapters, policy, and technical papers. Nicole has been a strong collaborator and supporter of the B2B Global Partnership in its goal to support transition of small-scale fisheries from vulnerability to viability. It is my honor to invite Nicole Franz to deliver today's talk for the B2B thematic webinar series May 2023, and the title of her talk is The Transition from Vulnerability to Viability Through Illuminating Hidden Harvest. Thank you very much, Nicole, for doing this and taking the time to talk to us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prateep, for this very kind introduction and for giving me the opportunity to join all of you here and to present a little bit about this work. I'm gonna share my screen to start my presentation. Let me see. There we go. Just hold on. I'm on the wrong slide. As always, when it's supposed to be ready, it isn't. So please bear with me. Here we go. I'm going to try again. Okay. Why is this happening? Still not the right slides. So hold on again. Just a second. As always with technology, when you need it, it doesn't work. Even though we just tried it, I promise. Okay. Now we should be good. Okay, I made it with this delay. Now I'm going to start really on presenting this Illuminating Hidden Harvest study. And a lot of what I'm going to present today is probably not very new to you, because you're all interested in and working on small-scale fisheries. So there will be lots of things that you already know. But I think what is important with this Illuminating Hidden Harvest report that was launched earlier this year is that this is one global report that brings a lot of that knowledge together and provides, importantly, more updated global figures about the contribution of small-scale fisheries to sustainable development. So in my talk today here, I would provide an overview about the approach we have taken for this study, share some of the key findings and also some of the lessons learned from the approach, and obviously also some information about the way forward in terms of the recommendations from the report, but also in relation to what we're already doing. But before we do that, I want to give first voice to some of the many contributors that have made this study happen. So please join me for this video. And I need to just kind of unshare for a second again, because I need to make sure that I have the sound activated so that you can hear the video. Okay, that should work now. Okay, I will start sharing the video with you.
The contribution of small-scale fishery to sustainable development are often undervalued or overlooked.
This results in missed opportunities to progress the Sustainable Development Goals.
And in the worst instances, small-scale fisher and fish workers experiencing increased marginalization
and exclusion from governance spaces and resources.
The Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, or FAO, Duke University, and the World Fish team up in 2017 to help address this issue
by launching the Illuminating Hidden Harvest Global Initiative.
This initiative will help to further improve methods and capacities to collect, analyze, and use data in support of small-scale fisheries.
As the basis for sound and inclusive policymaking and resource governance.
A major output of this initiative is a research report
that uses a multidisciplinary approach
to assess and broaden our understanding of the values of marine and inland small-scale fisheries globally.
The report looks holistically at small-scale fisheries and their contributions to
the environment,
livelihoods and the well-being,
nutrition,
households and global economies,
fisheries governance.
Across all this, we paid particular attention to the role of women
and the gender aspect of small-scale fisheries.
The Illuminating Hidden Harvest team developed a rigorous methodology.
In-country experts used this methodology to look beyond official sources of fisheries data
to collect and synthesize information about small-scale fisheries.
For 58 country and territory case studies spanning
Africa,
Asia,
Oceania,
Europe,
and the Americas.
Countries were prioritized based on the importance of their fisheries sector
in terms of employment, production, and nutrition.
All researchers attended one-on-one training sessions on the Illuminating Hidden Harvest methodology,
covering data gathering, compilation, and documentation.
A network of 28 gender advisors was engaged alongside some of the country teams
to ensure that women's contributions to small-scale fisheries were elevated in the research.
The report consisted of other comprehensive data harvesting techniques, including
a questionnaire responded to by 104 FAO member countries,
a review of national datasets on labor force and household income and expenditure survey,
and an assessment of fisheries policies and the FAO LEX database.
We work with expert teams to highlight important themes,
shining the needed light on issues such as indigenous people,
and the importance of identity in understanding fishers and fish workers' choices.
Thanks to the contribution of more than 800 experts,
new and clear insights are coming to the surface,
adding to the growing body of evidence around small-scale fisheries.
We will continue to develop new methods and capacities for better data collection in the future,
that governments, researchers, and others can apply and refine.
Critically, the elimination, hide and harvest knowledge will support the implementation of the small-scale fisheries guidelines
by providing key information to organizations and activists.
To make a strong case for productive, sustainable, and equitable small-scale fisheries for all.
So this was just a small glimpse, and I apologize. I know the audio is not so good, but I hope you could read the subtitles. I want to recall some of the information that was featured in this video in relation to the IHH approach. So just to go back a bit also to the objectives, basically recognizing that small-scale fisheries are complex socio-ecological systems, the Illuminating Hidden Harvest report really took a multidisciplinary approach, which is closely linked to the spirit also behind the Sustainable Development Goals framework, and of course also in line with the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries. And in particular, the Illuminating Hidden Harvest report looked at small-scale fisheries' contribution to the 3 pillars of sustainable development, with a strong focus on nutrition, on governance, and on gender as cross-cutting dimensions. So you heard a little bit about the methods that we used to compile this report. It was a tapestry of approaches. Firstly, we compiled these 58 country and territory case studies that were carried out by national research institutes and collaboration sometimes with fish organizations, with local and international fisheries experts, with the objective to compile existing data and information and to also supplement that with surveys and with expert knowledge as needed. We also had gender focal points identified for the countries to support that. Then we had this ad hoc questionnaire that we had developed as FAO and disseminated to our member countries that was replied to by 104 FAO members and country case and territories, and that helped also to validate some of the data that we have collected through the country case studies and to triangulate it. And then, as mentioned in the video, we also used available data sets, global data sets, literature reviews, labor force surveys, household income and expenditure surveys to tease out information about small-scale fisheries. And last but not least, we also had commissioned a number of thematic studies to look at key aspects of small-scale fisheries that cannot easily be quantified, but are equally important, such as, for example, in relation to issues affecting indigenous small-scale fisheries or the issue of identity in small-scale fisheries. Now, all of these 58 country and territory case studies basically were then the main basis for the data from which we derived global estimates. And you can see the coverage here in the map of these 58 countries and territories, which have been selected according to a number of indicators. And these countries that we included in the country case studies account for 69% of global marine catch and 62% of global inland catch, according to the FAO data. I also want to go a bit deeper into what is chapter 3 in the IHH report that deals with the challenge of defining small-scale fisheries. The definition of small-scale fisheries, as you know, is always something that is very challenging, and there's no globally agreed definition of small-scale fisheries. So in the IHH report, we have this chapter 3 then that looks at how we think about defining small-scale fisheries by systematically applying a characterization matrix approach that allows assessing the various dimensions of small-scale fisheries in a way that aligns much better with the high diversity of the subsector at the global level, but most importantly at the national level. Because capturing and valuing this diversity and the complexity of small-scale fisheries is obviously of crucial importance to making informed management and policy decisions. So here, I'm not going to go into detail, but I just want to give you a little glimpse of the different groups of characteristics that we have included in this matrix that we then apply to different fisheries. And these can be grouped in terms of fisheries indicative gear, the vessels, operations, operational characteristics, economic characteristics, and catch utilization. And we have slightly different characteristics that we applied in the case of marine fisheries and in the case of inland fisheries. And basically, for each of these characteristics, then the fisheries were scored on a range of numbers from 0 to 3, and using a variety of sources of information to make those judgments, so that this approach really is suitable for data limited fisheries and has the potential for allowing us also to then link the information that is generated through this matrix with other structural and statistical data. So basically, what we asked the country case study authors in the 58 countries was to use that matrix and to characterize every single fishery that was included in those country case studies, applying this. And in the report, this chapter then goes much more into detail into how this matrix works, how it can be used as a cost-effective tool to better understand the characteristics of the fisheries in a country. And it really can provide a common framework for comparing fisheries within countries, but also potentially between different regions. And we talk about in the study how it could facilitate discussions on fisheries-related matters where the issue of scale arises and provide more clarity and objectivity with respect of the scope of management or policy measures that are then applied to small-scale fisheries. And in a bit more practical terms, let me just share a quick look here at one example of the sort of results and comparisons that can be derived when we apply this characterization matrix. Here in this case, the figure shows the distribution of total catch based on the attribute score for gear type. So in the marine sector, you can see that, for example, 66% of the catch was caught using passive gear, while in the inland subsector, catches were much more evenly distributed across 3 categories of both active and passive gear types. So this is just to give you one example of the type of information that this matrix can generate that then can help to inform management and governance. I now want to go into the report findings, a summary of the key findings. And again, I'm going to share a video with you for that. There will be no sound this time, just some music, but some text to read. It's about 5 minutes long and packed with lots of numbers and statistics. But I'm going to go back and then unpack some of those numbers again also in the rest of the presentation. So I hope you could see that. I think there was some interruptions, but as I said, I want to go back to some of these findings because I know it's a lot of information. So I'm just going to repeat and detail some of them again. As this what you see here is again some of the numbers that you see. I'm going to go back again through the report, through the different thematic chapters, and this relates to this first one on the contributions in relation to the environmental aspects. And here you can see in the infographic that basically out of the total global fish catch of 92 million tons, small-scale fisheries account for at least 40%, because what we found, what we have the evidence for, is likely still not providing the full picture. Still something remains hidden, but we know at least for at least 40% we now have the evidence. And that is equivalent to 37 million tons of fish. And 68% of that is from marine fisheries, and 32 of the small-scale fisheries catches from inland fisheries. We also identified species groups for a large part of the catch, and then breaking that down using the available data, we found that the most representative species groups included small pelagics for marine fisheries, such as sardines, herrings, and anchovies, and also other pelagic fish, such as mackerels, scads, and tunas. These together add up to almost 50% of the total marine small-scale fisheries catch. And for the inland fisheries catch, for which we had the data at that level, we could identify that carps, tilapias, and small pelagic species dominate the small-scale fisheries inland catch. What we have done in the Illuminating Hidden Harvest report is to then also define something like pathways for the way forward in a way also. And here, in relation to the environmental aspects, basically considering that 40% of the global capture fisheries production comes from small-scale fisheries. We're talking about 31% of the overall global marine catch and 99% of the global inland fisheries catch that is coming from small-scale fisheries. And the IHH report also goes then deeper in that chapter into describing how small-scale fisheries are highly diverse with high variability in their technology and the operational scale and complexity. So we then have, this is just one summary chart that I'm bringing up here, but then we have identified some suggested actions here, for example, in this context, to improve systematic collection of reliable and comprehensive data, taking into account specific characteristics and contributions of small-scale fisheries to ensure that they can be better understood, assessed, and managed. And that then will help to contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, in particular, in this case, in relation to SDG 14, which is on life below water and has a number of targets. I'm not going to bring them up in detail here, but there are a number of targets that speak, specifically, obviously, in this case, to marine fisheries and the sustainability of the stocks and of fisheries, but also in particular in relation to the rights of small-scale fisheries under target 14.b. In another chapter in the IHH report, we then look at the livelihoods dimension, the contribution to economic value and livelihoods. And here, as you saw, in total, almost 500 million people depend at least partially on the engagement in small-scale fisheries. And to derive these numbers, we used primarily national household-based surveys from 78 countries for which we could identify such surveys, and from which we got these numbers. So this is an example where we're using non-fisheries data sources to derive and validate these numbers, and also against other numbers and other sources. importantly, also not only in terms of livelihoods, but also in terms of economic value that is generated, which is obviously only part of the value, but it is an important part, and it should also be acknowledged that also the economic value that is generated by small-scale fisheries is very considerable, with an estimated total landed economic value of $77 billion. So similarly, like we have done for the other chapter, also in terms of the economic and livelihood benefits of small-scale fisheries, we have developed these pathways, or summarized these pathways based on the findings. So again, this is just one example that I'm sharing here with you. So basically, the core message here is, of course, that the economic and livelihood benefits of small-scale fisheries can contribute to sustainable development. And based on the 58 country case studies we had compiled for the Illuminating Hidden Harvest study, that generate 44% of the total landed economic value of the catch, the small-scale fisheries for those country case studies. So basically, that calls to ensure that the benefits that are derived from small-scale fisheries are then fairly distributed, because of course what we're facing often is, even if that value is generated, it does not necessarily stay or reach those who are at the very first point of entry of those value chains. And that's important to then reach and contribute to SDG number 1 in terms of the reduction of extreme poverty for all people. To the next one. Oh. So the next chapter that I want to kind of briefly go back to is the one on relation to gender inclusivity and equality in small-scale fisheries. Again, here are just the numbers again. And in this study, we were basically able to provide a more robust set of gender disaggregated data, which showed that an estimated 45 million women participate in small-scale fisheries, be it in value chains, be it for subsistence. And you saw the breakdown that's repeated here. And what is really noteworthy here also is a high number of women that engage in subsistence fisheries. So again, going back then to these pathways, what we can see here is that the core message really is that gender must be considered to fully understand and support the contributions of small-scale fisheries to the SDGs. And knowing that at least almost 45 million women participate in small-scale fisheries worldwide, what is really needed is to institutionalize the collection, the analysis, and the use of gender disaggregated data on small-scale fisheries to really support inclusive policy and programs, which then again will contribute to achieving the SDGs, in this case in particular SDG 5, which is about gender equality. One important new innovation in this Illuminating Hidden Harvest report, where we really in a way have pushed the boundary in understanding, is how important small-scale fisheries are for nutrition. And this is particularly important as we're increasingly hearing about food systems approaches, and that is something that is gaining more and more traction also in terms of policy making. So this is something where it's very important to show the role that small-scale fisheries has in the food system. So again, here's just again the summary of some of the key findings that came out and that were already mentioned. Obviously, fish is rich in micronutrients, that is valid almost across the board. But what is important is that the small fish are especially nutritious, which are really an important part of the catch that is generated by small-scale fisheries. And what we did was that we applied models on the potential of the small-scale fisheries catch to contribute to nutrition, and the figures that we derive from that are impressive, and they're repeated here, that small-scale fisheries landings really could provide 987 million women globally with 50% of the recommended nutrient intake of omega-3 fatty acids, for example, or 477 million women globally with over 20% of the recommended nutrient intake of calcium, selenium, and zinc. So this is something that we really need to include much more strongly in the narrative around small-scale fisheries. Here's an example of a deep dive of these thematic studies that we also included in the report. And this is included in the nutrition chapter of the report, where we looked at small-scale fisheries, poverty and food security and nutrition in terms of physical and economic access in sub-Saharan Africa. So for this, we looked at World Bank Living Standard Measurement surveys in the African Great Lakes region, in particular here, as you can see. And we found that households that are living close to or engaging in small-scale fisheries are less likely to become income poor, with values down between 9 and up to 15%, that they had increased rates of fish consumption about twice as often per week and up to 3 times as much as others. And also that the households had higher rates of food security in general, up to 12.6% compared to the other households. And also we found that the proximity to small-scale fisheries is also associated with lower inequality in relation to fish consumption, for example, between wealthier and poorer households by an average of 30%. So this is just, again, to give you an example that we don't only have the global numbers, but also some deep dives in terms of new evidence. We then have the last thematic chapter that looks at global patterns of management and governance of small-scale fisheries. And here, again, as you heard already in the video, there were a number of findings. One, of course, that the fishers and fish workers often see themselves as active contributors to the small-scale fisheries guidelines. And a survey of a large number of small-scale fish organizations confirmed that quite obviously 99% have harvesting and sustainable fisheries management goals, but importantly, 60% of them also have goals that go beyond specifically fisheries and that relate more to broader dimensions of human well-being, including in relation to decent work or food security or access to certain services, for example. In the Illuminating Hidden Harvest study, we also then looked at linking policies with the amount of catch that those policies govern. And as you can see here, we were able to determine that for every 10 metric tons of catch, there's formal co-management provision for about 4 of them, but then for only 2 tons out of 10, this co-management framework is actually then operationalized. So it applies to 4 tons on paper out of 10, but only in the case of 2 tons, it is actually really resulting in action on the ground, according also to expert opinion that we consulted for this. So what we came up then at the very end of the report is just a summary of some key recommendations for the way forward, and those are all listed here. It's a lot. Let me quickly go through them. One is to further explore and build on the country case study data. We've only used, let's say, the tip of the iceberg because our objective was to derive global estimates. So we only picked a few key indicators for which we had data, but we have much more that we can still explore and use also, not at the global level, but we can still learn from. We need to continue to reconsider how small-scale fisheries are characterized and defined. Again, exploring this characterization matrix approach may be useful in this context. It is important to continue to incorporate the multidimensional contributions of small-scale fisheries across policies and actions, as is also the purpose of the V2V project, obviously. And that includes to incorporate in particular the nutrition and other livelihood outcomes into the management decisions and design. Equally important is to recognize the needs and benefits of effective participatory approaches and to really put them into practice. And there's still a lot to learn on that. And then to improve data and information for promoting the small-scale fisheries guidelines implementation to also build on the IHH study approaches and methods, to improve data collection and analysis, moving beyond the limitations of business as usual, and to collect information to help recognize the role of women and ensure their visibility and participation. And last but not least, for all of this, to invest in building capacity and partnerships. Just very briefly on some lessons learned on applying the IHH approach in terms of challenges and limitations. It confirmed that there's still lack of sufficient primary data on small-scale fisheries at the country level, in particular about the smallest small-scale fisheries that are most informal, where mostly women are involved, for example, food fishers or small freshwater bodies. Another issue is also the clear definition of small-scale fisheries at the country level, because that sometimes also hampers then collecting the data, understanding what exactly is investigated. Another shortcoming is also that the IHH study is only providing a snapshot in time. It does not provide temporal trends. In terms of benefits, we think that this comprehensive multi-dimensional quantification of small-scale fisheries contributions at the global level, however, can help and is useful. And this was done leveraging different sources and approaches, as I mentioned before, not including also non-fishery specific data sources. An understanding of the environmental, economic, gender, nutrition, governance, and social dimensions of small-scale fisheries through these linked databases that we have created is something that we will spend probably still quite some time on. Also, it was quite important to create opportunities for interaction among individuals from different disciplines in different national level agencies or academia in ways that might be conducive to developing new solutions for small-scale fisheries. And also, it provided us with a well-coupled science policy interface that facilitates empirical findings to be translated to policies at national levels also through the collaboration of the three partners, FAO, World Fish, and Duke University. Very briefly, I know we're running out of time quickly. I just want to share to conclude that even if the report now has been finalized and launched, we're in parallel, in a way, already started also picking up on some of the recommendations and working on next steps. So this is a picture from a workshop that we held just prior to the launch of the workshop in March, of the report in March. And here we had participants from Tanzania, the ones from Madagascar that were supposed to come, unfortunately could not make it, but we also had participants from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Malawi. I'm mentioning Tanzania and Madagascar here in particular because in collaboration with Duke University, we are actually now working on following up on the IHH approach through capacity development with national research institutes, government representatives, and other partners. Basically to review available data at the country level, to build on the IHH country case studies, and to identify related gaps that we can then help addressing and develop related support. So that is something where we already had the inception workshops virtually, and we will have in-country work very soon in this year. We also have developed or are developing a number of capacity development materials. We're finalizing the IHH country case study approach handbook, so that will be released soon. And related to that also an e-learning that will be made available online. And we have developed already a number of IHH-based policy briefs. The ones for Zambia and for Malawi are already available, and the ones for Uganda and Tanzania are just being released. And these have been prepared with members of the IHH team, but more importantly, with people from the national research institutes, from the government, from small-scale fishing communities. So really using a participatory approach to look at the situation of small-scale fisheries in the country together. And what is also happening is that we are engaging in the preparation of a nature collection to generate some more peer-reviewed materials around the IHH. Some of these papers have already been published. You can see here one example. This is basically a write-up of the country case study from Norway that our country case study authors have put together that's already released. And then that IHH collection would be launched early next year. And related to that, we're also working on releasing the IHH database. Not all of the raw data, obviously, but we're going to release quite a bit. So hopefully that can inspire much more research and learning, and also generate new collaborations to learn even more about small-scale fisheries in the future and inform related decision-making and management in the future. And with that, I'm going to stop here. I know I had a late start by not being able to get my slides up. So I hope this is still enough time for some questions or comments. Back to you, Pratik.
Thank you very much, Nicole. It's indeed extensive study, covers a lot. Not only within the small-scale fisheries sector, but in terms of the geographical and the cultural spread of things. So it captures a lot. So obviously, there are a lot of implications in terms of how small-scale fisheries is going to be not only understood, but also different work on small-scale fisheries is going to be influenced by this extensive work. So I have a question, and we're going to receive more questions from the audience that is watching it on YouTube. But I have received a question from Derek Armitage at Waterloo, and Derek is writing, "Thank you, Nicole. The IHH initiative is an incredible resource and touchstone. Given the upcoming 10-year anniversary of the SSF guidelines, I'm wondering if you can think of 5 to 10 years out how this research will help to shape global and national level policy to support small-scale fisheries. Are there one or two key ways this information can help bend the curve of small-scale fisheries vulnerability? For example, declining stocks, climate change, etc., and continue to further foster more viable small-scale fisheries."
Thank you, and good to know Derek is here. Thank you very much for joining, taking the time. Yes, good question. And next year, yes, will be an important year again for small-scale fisheries because, yes, that small-scale fisheries guidelines will already be 10 years old. So that's an important moment for all of us to take stock, no? And it creates, again, hopefully momentum around small-scale fisheries. And what we hope is that the Illuminating Hidden Harvest study, in a way, draws attention to the need to really look at the multiple dimensions of small-scale fisheries. We still often see that there's a prevailing either economic lens or environmental lens that is applied to fisheries management. So by bringing new evidence, for example, in terms of the nutritional value, but also in terms of the governance and how participation of small-scale fishers in fisheries management is really also key to ensure the sustainability of the resources in the long term, but how we're still a long way from having that participation on the ground, that this evidence can hopefully trigger some more interest and some more action and some more solutions. So we hope that by also following up to work with some of the countries now, be it through the policy briefs, be it through capacity development, we will also be able to build the capacity to report or collect the data and analyze the data and use the data in a more disaggregated manner at the country level. It's important to see the differences between different types of fisheries. It is a continuum, obviously, but it is important to be able to understand that better. And we hope that this Illuminating Hidden Harvest study in a way provides another tool to do that. And what we are also doing is continue to use this multidisciplinary approach. So when we now engage at the country level, to not only work with the national fisheries agencies, but to also bring in then others that work on food security, that work on gender. So to really make those connections and stimulate those interactions. So hopefully we can see really a shift in the mindset in the future of what the functions are of small-scale fisheries and how they need to be supported.
Thank you, Nicole, and thanks, Derek, for asking that question. So we're still waiting for questions from the audience from YouTube. But in the meantime, if I may just ask a related question. There's a lot of data that has been generated by the IHH study, and it really sits with a rich background of another few sets of data that existed on small scale fisheries as well. So you made some references to that, but how does those existing data and then the new data that has been generated compare? And what kind of what are some of the key trends in small scale fisheries that we are beginning to see by comparing those two sets of data in itself? Like when you were presenting, and my reading of some of the reports that is available is we're seeing the number of people dependent on small scale fisheries has increased as compared to the previous set of data that exists. But at the same time, probably the overall catch size may have reduced from over 50% to 40% now. Of course, this doesn't include everything that exists, but given those two sets of data, what are some of the key trends and patterns that you are able to see for small scale fisheries?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, as I said, this is a snapshot for one point in time, but obviously there have been previous studies, and one of those that in a way inspired also the Illuminating Hidden Harvest was a hidden harvest study that was done and released in 2012 by FAO, World Fish, and the World Bank at the time. And yes, like you're saying, for example, the findings in some cases, it looks like as if they almost have gone down. The number of people we've confirmed that it's about 90% that are employed in capture fisheries are in small scale fisheries. And the absolute numbers obviously have gone up, but that's also because overall numbers have gone up in terms of population growth, obviously. I think what we can say is that the added value of the new Illuminating Hidden Harvest study is that the methodology and the evidence base is far more robust than what we had before. We have far more countries covered. We have more data, despite the gaps that we're still running into, despite the lack of information. We have a much more harmonized methodology that was applied. So in a way, the value here is that it's really much more reliable numbers. And also, for example, in terms of the subsistence numbers also, that is something that we also found quite interesting. And the Hidden Harvest study came out also in a time where we were all hit also by COVID, for example. And it really kind of showed or provides also the scientific evidence of the safety function in a way that small-scale fisheries still has for so many people. And that was particularly important in a situation like COVID. So being very aware also of this function, for example, in terms of subsistence for millions and millions of people, it's something that we think has not been made as clear and visible before, maybe. So that's an important message we would like to see brought forward much more.
Thank you, Nicole. I don't see any questions yet. Maybe I would extend that discussion by asking one more question about the context and the drivers of small-scale fisheries. In the last couple of decades, the nature of the drivers and the context within which small-scale fisheries kind of operated has changed drastically. We are now, seeing a lot of, movement and vibration in terms of blue economy and blue growth activities, that kind of overlaps with the space and the places that small-scale fisheries use. So what are some of the reference to the new kinds of drivers or more intensified drivers and the change in the context itself? And you mentioned one of them being the pandemic, and what we have learned from those. So how do we see small-scale fisheries in the context of this illuminating hidden harvests study outcomes, given that the number of drivers and the nature of drivers have changed, and SSF must respond to those or work along with some of those drivers in order to be viable.
Yeah, the question of drivers is quite interesting. We had included in our method, actually, we had pre-identified a set of drivers that we then had asked the country case study authors to respond to in the kind of rank. But then when we actually looked at them again, we found that they were not comprehensive enough. We felt they were missing out and they were potentially misleading to be included. They were more on the environmental side. Some were missing. So in the end, we decided not to include them. But we have some interesting indications that we received back also in relation of the drivers. It is obviously a changing world. And as we speak, even the drivers are changing again. For example, very recently, the WTO has agreed on a new fisheries subsidy agreement. No, that has happened just recently. Now, IHH in this context is useful because what we have done here is for the first time, we have tried to quantify the contribution of small-scale fisheries to international trade. The way currently trade statistics are reported do not allow to distinguish if a product is actually coming from large-scale fisheries, industrial fisheries, from aquaculture, or from small-scale fisheries. But it's quite important to understand that origin, no? Because it has impacts on who produces, who benefits, and also who consumes ultimately. So I think in a way, that new agreement, for example, on fishery subsidies, will become another important driver that we need to look at. So having some of the figures from the Illuminating Hidden Harvests tell us a bit more about the extent of participation in global trade, for example, can inform that discussion, but can also raise awareness within countries to maybe look at their fisheries and distinguish, no? Because there are different ways to implement that agreement, and having a definition for small-scale fisheries will be one of the tricky points in the next steps in relation to that agreement, probably. You're muted, Pratip.
I'm sorry. I mean, in that line, the characterization process and the methodology that you talked about is quite interesting, and that also speaks to the dynamics and the diversity and the complexity of small-scale fisheries that you mentioned in your talk. It almost suggests that this characterization process for small-scale fisheries and our effort to understand small-scale fisheries is as dynamic as the sector itself is, because there cannot be one set of definitions that permanently fix a definition for small-scale fisheries. So that's quite unique, and that's quite interesting, and suggests to the dynamic context within which small-scale fisheries also exist. So it almost makes it an ongoing effort to understand and characterize small-scale fisheries. And it is also very context specific, because how you characterize, small-scale fisheries within one region and within one culture is going to be very different from the other culture in other region, and the political domains as well. So that's quite interesting. But what I'm interested also to linking with the V2B work, to understand a little bit about the responses that this report and the extensive work that has been done. What has been some of the responses from governments around the world? And what does it look like for future, for building a profile within the country level policies for small-scale fisheries?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, some concrete examples from governments is what we see in this specific case for Tanzania and for Madagascar, where we have a direct request to use this approach and apply it, no, at the country level. And similarly, where we're developing or finalizing now the IHH briefs in Uganda and in Tanzania, there is a recognition of the value of this approach. So in that sense, it's positive. We also had shared preliminary findings on the report in the context of the FAO Committee on Fisheries, which brings together the different countries around the world. And there have been recommendations to build on this methodology, to continue working on that. And we're expecting that next month, basically, there will be the formal establishment of a new FAO subcommittee on fisheries management that should then convene for the first time in early 2024, probably. And having, for example, this database generated through the Illuminating Hidden Harvest, again, is something that would be expected to feed into the agenda of that new subcommittee by unpacking the data. As I said, we just have the tip of the iceberg. We have so many data points. We have so many aspects that still needs to be looked at and analyzed from different angles to go much deeper and look at some of the issues that you mentioned in terms of how do they relate to certain drivers, how do we characterize, what are the environmental implications. So we can still draw so many more information and findings from this database. So in that sense, we had good responses from countries. We also had responses from other partners, for example, from regional organizations, such as a Southern African Development Community, where we have also presented the Illuminating Hidden Harvest. And they also have requested us for a policy brief for the whole region, for all the member countries of Sub-Saharan Africa, to look at that, like a sub-regional profile. Another interested stakeholder is the African Development Bank. So that's an investment, important investment partner for the sector, who also has requested us to provide an infographic, basically, for the whole African continent, using the IHH data that we have, that then can also inform different processes within the African Development Bank. So there have been responses from different stakeholders to the report for different purposes. So we hope that that will continue to be so.
Yeah, I don't see any further questions or anything at this point, but the way it works, Nicole, is it is going to be available for people to view after this webinar as well. So often people post comments and questions, and if you don't see it, we can forward it to you for any possible response and discussions. But at this point, I would like to bring it to an end, and really huge thank yous to you for making the time and talking about this very important initiative and the study and the amazing outcomes that have been achieved. There's a lot, so this report is going to be very useful for not only people who work on small-scale fisheries sector, but also from a methodological point of view in related resource sectors. So because methods are something that we need to keep innovating all the time, given the increasing complexity in the sectors that we work. So thank you very much, and we like to continue this discussion as we go forward, and we really appreciate the work that you and the team and the organizations as partners have done on the Illuminating Hidden Harvest. We're looking forward to engaging more in that process. Thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye bye, everybody.